Okay, good morning, everybody. I am glad that you are with us today. Today is this is the ELL webinar for learning about how to report about ESOL coordinators, language minority students, and English learners, and how we will be calculating the categorical ELL funds this year. I don't think we have anyone where you can currently call in, so we can't hear you. You have been muted. But in addition to myself, I have with us Miguel Hernandez, who is the Title III specialist. Miguel, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm glad that you're here today. And in addition, we have Alan Lytle, who is the EL specialist responsible for all things related to assessment, especially with ELPA 21 and English learners. So I'm glad that you guys are here today. You there, Alan?
I'm here.
Okay. As we go through today's presentation, there will be breaks put in for questions and answers. However, as a question comes up, feel free to put a question in the Q&A answer box, and Alan and Miguel will help me keep an eye on those Q&As, and as we take a break for questions, they will share with me any questions that are coming in so that we can try to address them while we are on the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted as soon as possible on the ADE English Learners page, as well as on the location where Zoom webinars are found with Team Digital. But the primary location you can find it will be on the ADE English Learners page. So let's get started. Just as a reminder, you can have a copy of this presentation right now as we go by going to that tiny URL that's posted here, and it's also posted in the chat, so you can just link on it for your convenience. Okay, today's goal is to inform districts regarding ADE's expectations regarding data reporting related to language minority students and English learners for 2016-17. There's a commissioner's memo that came out a few weeks ago, and sorry, I'm getting a message on my computer. It came out a few weeks ago regarding this and the need for today's webinar. A key thing that will be changing is that in order to determine the amount of ELL funds that you will receive for 2016-17, this is based on the number of English learners identified by each district. That piece has always been true. How you notify ADE of the number of English learners you have, that is the part that is changing. This year, the determination will be made utilizing Cycle 2 data that we retrieve from eSchool and information that you submit via your district exit plan in Industar. So we will be making sure in today's webinar that you know how to accomplish those two things. This new process completely replaces the annual home language survey report. For those of you who've been in Arkansas prior to this school year, you know that we annually had to report around November 1st via a separate data entry system regarding the number of students you have. In order to promote efficiency of data collection that's consistent with Act 1181 of 2015, we analyzed where we are collecting this data over this last school year and determined that most of the data was already being collected in eSchool. We just needed to make sure that everyone who enters that data in eSchool is clear on exactly what needs to be entered. In addition, we had to tweak a couple of things on AXIT, and for those districts who are Title III, there will be a few tweaks coming to your application as well, and we will talk about that shortly. But please note at the bottom of this screen, just because we got rid of the report, we did not get rid of the requirement that all Arkansas students must complete individual home language surveys upon initial enrollment in Arkansas schools. So here's a summary of the changes. The Cycle 2 EL data is used for the ELL fund count. All districts, even those with no English learners, need to complete the District ELL Fund General Description Form in ACSIP. This form you will see in just a minute. Even if you don't have an English learner, you have to complete this. In the past, even districts who did not have English learners had to complete the home language survey. But it was a very simple thing to complete, and you'll see for those districts, it's very simple. All districts must sign the ELL Fund program assurances that will be in the ACSIP assurances in IndiStar. And Title III will have different questions or information requested on the application in the future. Here are some of the cycle reports that contain information related to English learners. The first report is called the District National Origin Report. This is filled out by the Equity Coordinator for National Origin students, which is often the ESOL coordinator. It may also just be your district ELL or district equity coordinator. It contains assurances that you will provide appropriate services for language minority students in your district. Then district student ELL information as well as school student ELL information is provided in cycles 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And while we use cycle 2 to determine funding, we may use other cycles to pull data related to ELs for various assessments. This includes for ELPA 21, it includes for Aspire, ACT, Iowa. When you get rosters that are pre-filled with information regarding who is an EL student, who's a former EL student, this information is pulled from the data you have submitted in eSchool. So it's critical that it is kept correct and current. Then also in cycle 2, we get what's called a district home language and a school home language report. And these reports indicate to us the number of students who speak a language other than English or who have indicated a language other than English on their home language survey. In the past, you might remember having to report about the number of ELs who have dropped out, been retained, who are in special education, who are gifted, who are migrant, who are in Title I, etc. All of that data we can now pull from cycle reports, and so there is not a need for you to report to us in a system like we had in the past about those items, because we can pull it all together if you keep the EL information current and correct. Okay, now as we go through here, I'm going to start with this. Foreign exchange students, a question that I'm often asked is, how do we include them? Are they included? You need to treat these students as you would any other student concerning screening, identifying, and serving for English learner services. They must complete a home language survey, and you must screen them if anything other than English is listed, and place them in ESOL services if qualified. The parents and guardians have a right to decline services, as do all other parents of English learners. If you want more information on the legal background and justification for that, or be able to explain to host families why this is occurring, there is a link there in the presentation, and it's also on ADE's English Learners page about serving foreign exchange students. That is a memo from the U.S. Department of Ed to a state about how do we treat foreign exchange students. Okay, now, in order to identify language minority students and English learners, I want to make sure everyone's aware of the basic process of that, so you know how you're choosing the students that you will be coding and identifying in eSchool. All districts must have a process for identifying potential ELs, and a potential EL, another word for that, is language minority students. So keep that in mind as we go through this. The first thing you're going to do is administer a home language survey to all students. This survey, then, you use the results from that to screen those who answer anything other than English on the home language survey with a state-approved screener or placement test. Here is a sample home language survey. Okay, these are questions. This is found on the ADE English Learners page. The main thing to note about a sample home language survey is that you're getting at the language background of the student and the language usage background of the student, including what was the first language they learned to speak, what languages are spoken in the home, what languages are spoken or understood by the child, and what languages are spoken or understood by adults in the home who interact regularly with the child. That last question is a question that can be on your home language survey, but it's also one you want to update regularly to make sure you're communicating to families in the best and most understood language and manner that they can have. Note here, a student only needs to complete the home language survey once upon initial enrollment into your school district. So how do you process a student's home language survey? Well, in most districts, the exact procedure, you need to determine that. But generally speaking, you notify your ESOL coordinator of any student with an answer other than English. A copy of the home language survey is filed in the student's cumulative folder for all students, not just your language minority students or your English learners, but also for your English only students. So if for some reason Office for Civil Rights or some other monitoring happened and you were asked to show a copy of students' home language surveys, it would be evident that you equitably survey every student and not just selectively survey those that you think need to complete it. If any language other than English is indicated, you enter that language in eSchool and the home language field. You're indicating what is the language on the home language survey that triggered a screening for English learner status. You enter that on the student tab in registration. Otherwise, you enter English in the eSchool language field. If a guardian indicates preference for communication in a language other than English, you enter that chosen language in the eSchool Guardian tab under the General Information tab. We will see what that looks like in just a minute. Okay, I want to share a few caveats to consider when determining if a student is a language minority student. Generally speaking, it's every student who answers anything other than English to any of the questions on the home language survey. Now, occasionally you will have students who are not truly a language minority student who put something other than English on there. The best way to find out that information, many districts conduct a parent interview to verify the language responses other than English to see if they are truly a language minority student. If not truly a language minority student, you need to file documentation of why the other language was indicated on the home language survey with the student's home language survey. and then put EN for English as the home language in eSchool. So here's some examples. I've seen in the past where some parents put Spanish on the home language survey as a language that the child understands. Well, this was because after interviewing the family, going through the screening process, they found out that, well, they've been having them watch Dora the Explorer or having them, try to play with some friends of theirs who speak Spanish to try to learn some Spanish as they go. And that is good and that's encouraged, but that does not make a student eligible for screening as a language minority student. So that particular student, you would just put documentation in their file. It can be a memo you put in there. It can be a form you develop to indicate why you don't screen a student who puts something other than English and someone from your district signs it. But just document why you didn't screen them. Another example I've seen, the home language survey indicated French was spoken in the home. Upon visiting with the child and family, it's discovered that French was listed because the family is learning French in order to visit France in the future. This is not a language minority student. So you would once again document why they're not a language minority student and enter English in eSchool. A couple more caveats you could consider. You potentially have a 5th grade student who was in an English-only home, and in this grade level that could change. Doesn't really matter what grade level. They were in an English-only home until 2 years ago, when the dad remarried and the stepmom speaks Spanish fluently. So now there's occasionally, the stepmom's parents and family are in the home and they're speaking in Spanish, and maybe they're trying to teach this student Spanish at home. This is not a language minority student. This is someone who had the other language influence added after they were developing language, and it's not truly one of their first languages. Okay, so that would not be a language minority student. Now, here's another situation that people have asked me about. Child grew up in a Marshallese-speaking home, or a Chinese-speaking home, or a Russian-speaking home until age 4, and then was adopted by an English-only family. So now their home is English-only, but they first learned that other language. This is a language minority student and needs to be screened for potential English learner status. Okay, another one is a kindergarten student comes from a home where Spanish is spoken by the parents. The student is very limited in any language due to a possible disability and hard to test for any language proficiency. So people will often ask, do we even have to consider this student because they aren't very communicative in either language? Yes. This is a language minority student, and under current practice and guidelines, you would still attempt a screening and identify them as an English learner if they cannot show that they're proficient in English. We do know that we need to continue to address how to identify, serve, and exit students with significant disabilities. But for now, this is a language minority student. So at this point, are there any questions before we go on how to identify these students in eSchool?
Yes, we have one. It says, are students whose home language is identified as American Sign Language considered ELs?
I believe so. Yes, we have looked into that in the past, and ASL is considered an additional language. Okay, we will go on. This is a graphic that kind of summarizes the process of identifying a language minority student in eSchool. First of all, the home language survey is completed. Then you have students that are either all English or any answer other than English. And you can verify that if needed, as I mentioned earlier. For those who are language minority student, In eSchool, you will enter the other language that triggered the screening as the home language because it's the language indicated on the home language survey. And then you will check the ESL box on the personal screen because you are notifying the ESL department, office person that this is a language minority student and needs to be screened. And you're also notifying ADE that this is a language minority student. So for us to know that a student is a language minority student, we are looking for a language other than English in the home language field for the student, and the check in the ESL box on the personal screen. Well, what does all that look like? Here is the student tab in eSchool, and you can see where the number 1 is. It says home language. The home language is any language other than English on a student's home language survey that you verify is a true reason for screening, and you must list that language. Otherwise, this is defaulted to EN for English. And there is a list of drop-down language codes. If for some reason the language you need is not listed, please contact Carmen Jordan at eSchool, or contact me and I can help you make connections with Carmen to get that language added. The language of correspondence is also listed here, and this is something you should ask the family regularly of your English learners or even language minority students to find out if they prefer a different language other than English for communication. If so, then you indicate that language, and you also can check use the language for mailings. Also on the parent guardian tab, there is the place to put the language of correspondence, and that can be used as well to indicate to use the language for mailing. Many of you may have parent link or other home communication systems where you can send a phone message home to students, for example. In those systems, most of them are set up where you could send a phone message out in various languages. For example, you have the English message, and then you have someone interpret that and provide a Spanish message or a Marshallese or an Arabic message. And if you have uploaded information into that other system, parent link, etc., with the language that is preferred by the parent, you can set your system up so that it will call families in the language that they prefer. But you can only do that if you have good data entry into eSchool, if that's where you're pulling your data from, which most systems are pulling their data from eSchool. Okay, sorry, this screenshot's a little blurry, but if the student is a language minority student and any language other than English is selected on the home language survey and they're truly a language minority student, then you will check ESL on the personal screen for that student. So all students with ESL checked are considered language minority students for state and federal reporting purposes. That doesn't mean that they qualify for ESL services. It's simply indicating that the ESL program needs to screen that student or has screened that student. Okay. Are there any questions so far about how to indicate a language minority student? I will assume there's not. Go on. So once you identify who your language minority students are, you need to screen them with an approved screener or placement test. Under current guidelines, rules and regs, we have in the special needs funding rules identified 3 assessments that are currently used as screeners or placement tests. That includes the loss or any updated version of the loss, the MAC2, and the TELPA, which was the English Language Development Assessments Screener, and from our prior statewide assessment with ELDA. These are the three that you can currently use for screening purposes. Okay, once you've screened and you've determined that a student is an English learner, and actually for any student you screen, you need to enter information on all language minority students in the ELL page. So to get to that page, you will select the Student Center, Demographic, and ELL, and if needed, use the search option to find the student and click on that student's name, then update any necessary data and click Save. Here's what the EL screen looks like. This ELL screen contains several different lines. There's the ELL entry exit. Notice that it is blue, which means it's a hyperlink, and it takes you to another page. Then there's an ESL, ELL wave date, and ESL, ELL monitored field. Okay, this ELL entry exit is critical. This takes you to the other page to enter more information. Everybody who's a language minority student, every student, you need to go to this other page to enter additional information. If this says no, then it is telling ADE that this is not an English learner. Either they never were EL, because students who aren't in this program at all will have a no there, or they have an entry and an exit date on the EL program screen and they're a former EL. If it says yes, then the student is a current English learner and they only have an entry date and the value box checked on the EL program screen. So how do you get to the EL program screen? You click on that hyperlink no, and you take a trip to the EL program screen, which looks like this. The EL program screen contains several different fields. This has the ELL entry exit dates. There is the start date, and that is the date that a student entered a U.S. school for the first time, regardless if the entry was in Arkansas or another state. So you do need to determine when the student first attended a U.S. school. Doesn't matter if it's your school or another school in Arkansas, or if it's in Florida, Iowa, Maine, Rhode Island, it doesn't matter. Part of that parent interview process where you might be verifying the home language survey, you will also somehow need to obtain a brief school history from the parents to determine what that ELL entry date is. Now, you may only be able to determine, a family comes in, they have a 10th grade student, and you find out that, they began school in Mexico, and it was in 3rd grade that they began school, and when they came to the U.S., they started out in Alabama. So you find out it was 3rd grade in Alabama, and you could maybe ask, do you remember what time of year it was? Was it the beginning of the school year, middle, end? And get an approximate time, and then choose a date that corresponds to that time of year within your school calendar and enter that as the ELL entry date if they don't have actual paper that shows when they began school in the U.S. In other words, you don't need to be a private eye and try to nail down the exact date that they started school, but it needs to be a very close approximation of the date they began schooling in the U.S. You don't change this date once it's entered. Okay. Then, if the student, you screened them and you have identified them as an English learner, the next thing you do is you enter a check right here in this value box where the blue arrow is pointing. It's very important, if they're an English learner, that they have a start date and they have the value box checked. Okay, if they have exited services, or they don't meet the criteria to be an English learner, but they meet the state criteria for fluent English proficient status, and they no longer receive services, then you will put an end date. The only time you put an end date on this screen is when they meet exit criteria and are classified as fluent English proficient.
Tricia, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Okay, what you're looking at right here, once a student has an end date that's posted, meaning they're no longer receiving services because they have exited status, do the folks in the field uncheck that value?
Yes, and I'll show that in just a minute, I think. But they do uncheck that value, but the system, I believe, also unchecks the value.
Okay.
When you save, it won't allow an entry and exit, and a start date, an end date, and a value. It won't allow all three to be saved. That is my understanding. But that value is only checked for English learners, and you uncheck it for those who are exited. Good question. Okay, so here's an example of the ELL entry-exit screen, and where you are showing that a student is an English learner. For this particular student, they began U.S. schools on February 2nd, 2010, and the value box is checked. So we know from looking at this that this is an English learner. By this value box being checked, then on the prior screen, the ELL screen, it would say yes next to ELL entry exit. This box right here, the value box, that combination of a start date and a value, that is what we're looking for to pull data related to identifying who your English learners are. If you only go through and put start dates and you don't put a check in that value box, your students will not pull up as English learners for funding purposes or for ALPA 21 rosters or for identification in other assessment rosters as an English learner. That will result in either you not getting funding or having to hand enter students on ALPA 21 and having to hand recode students on other assessments. So it's very important you get that combination correct. Here is a non-example. Okay, this shows where a student's start date was September 1st, 2010. If you can kind of see through the blue there, there is no check there. Do not do that. This student would not show up as an English learner, and they're not showing up as an exited student because there's no end date. They're kind of in limbo. So then back to the EL screen. There are two more fields that are there. There's the ESL, ELL waive date. If a student's parent signs the form waiving ESOL services, then the date that they sign the form is the date you put in the waive date field. The student is still an English learner and must still participate in ALPA 21 until they meet state exit criteria. A parent can waive services, but they may not waive identification or annual English language proficiency assessment. We do pull this field for different reasons in the testing assessment data. Okay, then if a student has exited from ESOL services and their academic progress is being monitored for 2 years in the regular education classroom as required by federal law, then you need to indicate in this ESL, ELL monitored box that they are M1 for monitored year 1 or M2 for monitored year 2. Notice in purple that this includes language minority students who you initially place as exited from ESL, ESOL services. And so they may never have been EL, but in an EL service, like, for example, kindergartners. But they do come from a language minority background, and we just don't know at what point they went from being an English learner to a fluent English proficient student. So this is how the data would look for a student who was monitored year one. Notice they have a start date, this student does, February 2nd, 2010. Then the LPAC determined, that's the Language Placement and Assessment Committee, determined on May 12th, 2015, that they had met the exit criteria and the student was exited from services. Notice the value box is not checked. That is correct. M1 is entered up here. And now this says no, ELL entry exit. So this data all taken together tells ADE this is not an English learner. This is a monitored year one student, and that they began schooling in the U.S. February 2nd of 2010 and exited English learner services on May 12th, 2015. So about the initially identified as fluent English proficient. It is a district decision at this time as to whether to use only the approved screener or to use the approved screener plus additional criteria related to state exit criteria. For example, the student test is proficient on your ELP screener, but you have assessment data from content areas that show they're performing below the 40th percentile for that grade level. You could still place the student as an English learner. The key is you need to have consistent criteria as a district for how you're using other data to verify proficient placements using your ELP screener. In the future, as part of ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, the state, along with stakeholders in the state, will be determining common entry and exit criteria, and will be able to be a little more clear as a state as to how to proceed in these situations. But at this time, it's a district decision. Another example, the student test is proficient on your ELP screener, and you have assessment data from content areas showing that they're performing above the 40th percentile for that grade level. In that case, you should initially place them as fluent English proficient and monitor them for 2 years. Please note, you are not required to use additional data beyond your ELP screener to determine if a student is proficient, but you may at this time. However, if you have ELP screener data that shows a student's proficient and other data shows they would meet the exit criteria if it were applied to them, you really should be exiting that student and not just placing them because you're trying to get to know them first. You need to have some data to back up why you would identify as an English learner. A lot of this is particularly important to look at in kindergarten. And remember, during those 2 years that they're monitored, you keep an eye on their performance, and if at any time they don't appear to be keeping up with the exit criteria, then you may consider reclassification back into English learner status and services. Do we have questions at this point?
Yeah, we have quite a few.
I thought we would.
So the first one goes back just a little bit, and it says, is it possible to change the personal page entry to LMS instead of ESL? That seems to make more confusion than it alleviates.
I wish we could, but at this time, we can't change that system. We will work on that in the future. Right now, try to think of it as a student who has to be screened by ESL for EL status. It's just a trigger to the ESL office.
Okay, our next question. does pre-K count toward the first year in a U.S. school?
At this point, it does not. You just count kindergarten and above.
Okay, question number 3. So as a point of clarification, a parent may not waive identification even if they indicate a language other than English in use. What should we tell parents who refuse to let us assess their student, and how do we identify the student in eSchool?
Okay. You still need to screen them. The student, you can screen the student when they're at school, and then you notify a placement. One thing in the past, under before No Child Left Behind, there was a time when you had to get permission to screen these students. Since No Child Left Behind and under ESSA, you do not have to get, it's not expected at all to get permission to screen or place students. You go through the process of administering the home language survey, screening the student. You can screen them at a separate location, or you can screen them at their school. I know in some districts, if the parent doesn't want to take them to the ESL center, then sometimes ESL staff sent out to their students' building, and the screening is completed there. And then parents are notified of the results and offered the opportunity to decline services. But if that process doesn't work and the parent's still causing you difficulty after explaining the need, feel free to contact me and I'll do the best I can to help walk you through how to respond. Did that answer that question?
I think it does.
You still need to identify them as a language minority student. And you would still need to determine if they're an English learner.
Okay, the next question. What documentation of M1 and M2 monitoring should we use? Just state assessment? We don't have a required set of monitoring forms that you should use, but generally speaking, what you need to do is monitor whether they're still meeting the state exit criteria. And that would include the state assessments, but it also would include content area performance, as well as teacher recommendations. If the LPAC, when they are doing the annual monitoring of your former students each year, the year 1 and year 2, if they say, that the student just isn't keeping up anymore, they're falling behind in their classes, or having difficulty with all the writing, and here's a writing sample that shows they're still having trouble with some of the constructions in English, and it's showing that they're using being influenced by their other language still, or their state assessment results start slipping, or their grades are slipping. Any of those are reasons that you could return them to English learner services. You just need to document it. And once they return to English learner services, you remove the M1 or M2, and you remove the end date, and you check the value box to reactivate them as an English learner. Okay, this next I'm going to combine 2 questions. So it says to administer the EL assessments, basically screenings. Who administers the screenings? What credentials are required, and what training is needed?
For each screener, you need to look in the documentation regarding that screener about the training required to administer it. It should be provided in the main manuals regarding that assessment, or from the vendors who sell those assessments. Many of the vendors offer training in how to administer that assessment. I can also, if you can't locate training that way through the vendors, then let me know, and I can probably point you to a district who has used a similar a similar screener, and they can potentially collaborate with you to do some training on that. If that becomes an issue for you, please let us know, and we'll do the best we can to help you through this last year of using those screeners. After this year, and Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, the intent is that we will be using ELPA 21 screener as the common screener for the entire state. And at that point, we will be providing statewide training on how to do that.
Right, that's correct. Okay, we have 4 more questions. This next one is about the American Sign Language users. Can we have verification from OELA that students whose primary language is American Sign Language would qualify as a language minority student under federal ELL guidelines? I'm not sure that this is the case, particularly since ASL is not an option for language in eSchool.
Okay, whether it's in eSchool or not, there's lots of languages not there. Alan, you and I have had this discussion before. Do you have anything to say about that at this time?
You and I need to talk about this some more.
Okay, we will.
Maybe for the person who asked that question, Tricia will be able to see the questions asked, and your question is now under the answered category. But we should be able to email you something once we have a final decision, and basically let everyone else know also.
Right, and I will send an email communication out with a copy of this recording or a link to the recording and the PowerPoint and some answers to the questions that were brought up in today's webinar.
Okay, here's the next question. Can you explain how to code students that are here for grades K through 2 and then leave to go home to the home country only to return in grade 9?
Okay, on that, then you put their ELL entry date as the date they began kindergarten, and then at this point, this is the guidance we've been given, you don't change that ELL entry date. It's the date they began U.S. schools, even if there's a gap in the time. But we can verify that answer with OELA as well.
Okay. 3 more questions. It says, I am unclear about why we would identify a student as FEP and then place that student in the program. In addition, you're asking us to monitor students we consider FEP for 2 years. I'm not clear on why we are monitoring an identified fluent English proficient.
Okay. Federal law requires that a student who is fluent English proficient, that they are monitored the first 2 years they are identified as a fluent English proficient student. So during that time, you monitor them, and if they are not performing well and it shows that they need services that are beyond what you would provide any struggling student and need to be classified or reclassified as an English learner, you do so and offer ESOL services. And the purpose of the monitoring is to ensure that they continue to make progress and that they were not exited too early. Most students that are monitored, they move on and they're doing very well. But once in a while, you will find a student who may have been exited too early, and then as the language demands of the next grade levels increase, their language learning needs become more evident, and the gap between what they actually can do in language proficiency and what they need to be able to do grows, and you need to return them to services. This is a federal requirement to do.
Okay, these are the last 2 questions for right now. So if we screen a child at school and the parent has stated we are not to assess a child, there will be a certain amount of conflict when the parent discovers that the screening has been done. How do you propose we deal with that? They are only parents, and this approach sets us up. They are our parents, and this approach sets us up for direct conflict.
Okay, I would explain it as there are many assessments that we're required to give to students. For example, when a student enters kindergarten, if they're a student, they will be given, I believe it's the QALS. I'm not the assessment office, but I think that's what we're still administering. And just like a parent cannot opt out of doing the QALS, they cannot opt out of being screened for English proficiency. And this goes back to Title VI and to Lau versus Nichols and to several other court cases about it's a protection for the child to ensure that we don't need to provide them any additional services due to their language acquisition needs. Like I said, I'd be glad to help visit with you about ways to do that. Each parent is different and each situation is different, so it's hard to give a blanket answer for how to respond to those parents.
Okay, last question for right now. And I think I might know the answer to this one, but ELBA 21 screener for the entire state. Will this take into consideration students who have been educated in English for several years in another state who may pass the screener but not be fully proficient?
I think part of what we can do on that is ELPA 21 will have a recommendation for if a student's proficient or not based on that assessment. But as a state, we develop common entrance and exit criteria. And that will be something we will work out in that process. Alan, if you have something to add or correct me, that's fine.
No, you're correct. I mean, even under current screeners, if a student has been in one of the other 49 states or U.S. territories, and they have or haven't received services, whatever the case may be, and then they move to Arkansas, the students under our definition of an entering student would be screened again. And if that screener comes back as needing services, then that would be the Arkansas definition for that student. The same with exiting students. We don't currently use another result for an incoming student. Now, with the ELPA 21 screener, we, meaning Arkansas, might decide to change that if the student comes from another ELPA 21 state using the screener. But we haven't discussed that yet because the screener is not available operationally.
Okay, I see the question about if it is not an assessment used for all students, then I thought by law we are required to receive parent permission to test. That is only for special education purposes. That does not apply in this situation. Just like the screenings you might give to place a student in reading recovery, or, you know, there are tests that we give all the time based on student need that we don't necessarily give every student, and you don't ask every time. You differentiate what tests are given to students. But with this particular one, you are not required to get permission. Okay, and the next one?
I'm answering that one via text, but okay. Basically, if you want, I'll answer this one quickly, and then this will be the last question. So, will the state pay for the ELPA 21 screener when it is required? Currently, that is the plan. Once the ELPA 21 screener is available operationally, then we will issue information to districts to let you know that the ELPA 21 screener will be the only screener available for usage in Arkansas, and confirm that the state will pay for the screener for you. But right now, that is the plan.
Okay, well, let's move on. You know, we do have until 11:30, so we are well on schedule. So let's move on here. So, thank you for your questions, everybody. Okay, there are questions about exit criteria that may be coming up as we've been transitioning from old assessments to new assessments, and as we're transitioning from No Child Left Behind to ESSA. A commissioner's memo came out, I believe, yesterday, LS 17009, about transitional exit criteria guidance. And this shows you how to utilize Iowa, ACT Aspire, and ACT results, as well as advising you to use spring 2015 ELDA scores for now in order to consider a student for exiting. An additional commissioner's memo will be released once ELPA 21 results are available sometime in fall 2016 as to how to utilize the ELPA 21 results. Here's a summary of the approved exit criteria. They have to have a spring English language proficiency assessment score. And you look at the proficiency levels. The current requirement is they must score proficient or above in all 5 sections. And right now, the only one that we have to look at is the ELDA for spring 2015. ELPA 21 began spring 2016, but we will not have those results until later this fall. The other criteria are grades from the previous year or semester. The student must have earned a grade of C or higher in core subject areas. State standardized achievement scores. They must score proficient or advanced, is what the criteria says on literacy and math. Criterion reference test, or score at or above the 40th percentile on a norm reference test. 2 teachers must recommend exit or reclassification, and that's often indicated by a signature on the exit form. And the decision to exit or reclassify a student is made on an annual basis by the LPAC following a review of spring ELPA results. I know we don't have spring ELPA results yet, but you may go ahead and exit students based on achievement test scores and spring 2015 ELDA scores for now. In order to meet criteria 3, which is achievement test scores, one of the following must be true. For grades 1 and 2, and this is the grade they were tested in, so it would be this year's 2nd and 3rd graders, their Iowa test math total and English language arts total national percentile rank at 40th percentile or above. On the 2016 ACT Aspire, the math and composite English language arts, that composite score is what you're looking at, not the individual reading English and writing, but the composite needs to have a score of reading ready or exceeding. Or on the ACT, this is a score some people aren't used to looking at. There is a math and English language arts national percentile. It says US rank on the form, and it will tell you where they rank in that math and in English language arts. It needs to be 40th percentile or above. If they meet one of those, they meet the achievement test criteria. For now, you still need to use spring 2015 ELDA data to meet the first criteria of meeting proficient on an English language proficiency exam. Okay. The student may be exited if the data supports it. If students meet all the exit criteria above except the spring 2015 state ELDA assessment results do not meet the criteria, districts may revisit that student's placement once ELPA 21 results are released. Do not exit at this time. The commissioner's memo shares these examples as well. Basically, one example is student A has a 5 on all 5 areas of the ELDA in the spring of 2015, a grade of C or higher in each core content area, 2 teachers recommending exit. The student's ACT Aspire scores were ready or exceeding on math and composite English language arts, and they may be exited. This example, they earned a 5 on all 5 areas of the ELDA in spring 2015, a C or higher in core content, and 2 teachers recommend it, but when you look at their spring ACT, Aspire, Math, and Composite ELA scores, student B was close in literacy and ready in math. They may not be exited based on those scores. And the third example is a student earned a 5 in listening, speaking, reading, and comprehension, but a 4 in writing and composite on the ELDA in spring 2015. But they meet all the other criteria. However, they may not be exited based on those scores, but you could consider them for exit once you get the spring 2016 ELPA 21 scores. Are there any questions at this point?
We don't have any currently.
Okay. Okay, another item that was on the former home language survey report had to do with reporting the number of recent immigrants you have. These are also already coded or should be coded in eSchool. And here's how you do that. You go by the federal definition of an immigrant. The federal definition of an immigrant is a student who's between the ages of 3 and 21, who is not born in any state and has not attended one or more schools in any one or more states for more than 3 full academic years. So that if they meet all of those criteria, then they are, yes, they are immigrant student. Note that not all English learners are immigrant and not all immigrants are English learners. Also note that this is a field that you do need to maintain. This is not a check it once and never return to it field. You know, after they're here for 3 full academic years, they're no longer considered an immigrant for this purpose, because this is related to a Title III program designed to serve recent immigrants that you may qualify for based on the number of students who fall in this definition. So it's important to revisit that field annually and make sure that that is kept current once the student no longer meets the immigrant definition. In order to mark a student immigrant on the personal screen for that student, there is a box that says immigrant. Make sure it says immigrant. Make sure you're not looking at migrant, but immigrant, and check that if they met the federal qualifications for an immigrant. The reminder that immigrant status is not EL or ELL status. It's not dependent on that. They may be an English learner, they may be fluent English proficient, and they may be an English-only student. ESOL program staff will probably not be the only people responsible for maintaining that data entry, because the recent immigrants may be English only, and the ESOL staff may never know about the student because they're English only. So you need to determine as a district who will maintain this data based on district parameters. Are there any questions at this point?
Yeah. Okay. First one, do the 3 years need to be consecutive? I'm not quite sure what that is referencing.
The 3 years for an immigrant student, it's 3.
Okay.
It doesn't say consecutive. It says, go back to the definition. Hold on. They need to have it, has not attended for more than 3 full academic years. So if they, came in 2010, was here a week, and then left, have they attended more than 3 full academic years? No. So it's more cumulative than it is consecutive.
Okay. And this next question is related to immigrant status also. What about U.S. territories such as Puerto Rico, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands?
That is a good question that Miguel, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Have you heard that discussed at any of your Title III meetings?
If they are a U.S. school, then they do not qualify.
But is Puerto Rico and those areas, are those considered U.S. schools?
My understanding is no.
Okay, that's what my understanding is as well. It's just the 50 U.S. states that are considered U.S. schools.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, and right now that's the end.
Okay. I think I saw some questions over in the chat box too. You might check over there.
Yeah, I've been answering those.
Okay. Just checking.
So we do have one question that just popped in. Do you want to take it now or you want to wait?
Go on.
Okay. It says we have to put the home language form in the cumulative folder. Do we have to do that every year, or can we just put it in the folder only when they enter our school district, for example, kindergarten?
You only do it upon their initial enrollment in your school district. So they only need one copy because you only need to do it once. Okay, we're going to go on. So in addition to what you would mark in eSchool, you have to enter data into ACCEP. Before we go on to that, I want to clarify one thing that just came to mind. Just like we said you need to verify language minority students, you know, if you have those Dora the Explorer students that aren't truly a language minority student, you may have students who put all English on a home language survey, and then as you go, you realize, you know, that the parent needed an interpreter at a conference, or the students' writing samples indicate that, you know, they're influenced by a language other than English. For example, they use word order that's more similar to Spanish than to English, or you see the parent and student communicating in another language. If you have evidence to and reason to believe they have a language other than English at home, you just document that and you screen the student for English learner services, and you change the language, the home language, to the language that you have evidence that they are using. And just make sure a copy of that documentation is with their home language survey, and then you proceed with screening and identifying as you would other students. I just wanted to clarify that as well. Okay, now we're going on to ACCEP and what you need to put in there. Districts need to put, for the school improvement section for state categorical funds, they need to have the general descriptions submitted by October 1st. There will also be state ACCEP assurances that the state ones are new, and they most likely will be available by October 1st. We're working on those in a couple of weeks. So that's something you need to make sure you complete. For schools who have English learners, they need to fill out a general description of how they're using English learner funds, and that needs to be filled out by October 1st. This applies to state categorical funding, what I'm getting ready to talk about. EL is one of the 4 state categorical funds. For your district and school funding general descriptions, you find them in InduStar by looking at the Complete Forms tab. There is a School Improvement Forms section. Occasionally, right now it's at the top. Occasionally, this menu is reorganized and the federal programs are at the top. Sometimes you have to scroll. So you're looking for the School Improvement Forms section. Specifically, you're looking for the ELL State Categorical Program General Description. If you were here last year and submitted these, the 4 categorical grants or categorical funds were combined into one form. This year, they each have their own form. So we are talking about the ELL form at this time. Every district must fill out the district EL categorical form. And that is because this is where you currently will tell us who your district ESOL or ESL coordinator's name, their phone number with area code, and their email. If a district has no English learners as of October 1st, then they need to click No English Learners and stop here and submit, and you're done. But if you have English learners, then you need to continue with completing this form. Okay, further down the form, you will see what's called a hint, and it's in yellow, and when you click on it, a pop-up box comes up. And it will remind you of what you may use that fund for. For our purposes, it reminds you of what's in the special needs funding rules for English language learners, especially Section 5. So it's just a reminder that these are the kinds of activities that you may use EL funds for. And so as you're deciding what you're putting in your description, if you can't fit it in one of these areas, you need to think twice about what you're using your funds for, or seek out technical assistance from us, and we'll help you make sure that you are using your funds appropriately. Then you do need to write a general description for how you are using your funds. In this general description, there's a box under here where you will type this in. The needs assessment provides the general results related to English learners. What were the conclusions from the needs assessment, and what did the review tell you? This is because this is a part of the overall ACSIT process, which is built on conducting a needs assessment every year and then building program activities and interventions and such to respond to the needs that you have in your district. So this is a general response. You need to tell us. You don't need to outline the data. We don't need a dissertation about the data or 4-page analysis of your data, but just show us or tell us, generally speaking, what did your needs assessment tell you about your English learners? That they are still working towards English proficiency, that you need to continue providing English language development instruction, that you need to provide training to teachers so they can better reach them in mathematics instruction, etc. Then you will describe how the EL funds are utilized, and you can see that hint again, or you can go to section 5.04 of the Student Special Needs Funding Rules for the eligible activities. Then you need to describe how the effectiveness of the program activities will be evaluated to determine whether you continue or discontinue those services. So you just type that in and you submit. Here are the EL funding approved expenditures. I'm not going to read these to you, but I'm going to point out a couple of them. On the first one, salaries for EL skilled instructional services. This is not supplanting the district financial obligations for providing teachers for EL students. For example, if you offer an ESOL science class or sheltered science class at the high school level, that's a great thing to do. If the class size is the same as all other science classes, then that teacher should be being paid from regular funds. If that class, and there's only one teacher in there, if you provide an additional teacher to be in there, so they have 2 teachers at the same time, the additional teacher could be paid for from EL funds. Or if you decide that the class size is approximately half, for example, 10 to 15 students, then you could pay a portion of that teacher's salary for that period in order to ensure a smaller class size, because you are going above and beyond what is required to provide a science class for a student. Same thing for a fourth grade classroom. You may decide in your district that you have, you're going to put your EL students, some districts only have a few students, and so they might concentrate them in one teacher's classroom who gets their ESL endorsement. They might have 4 kids in there who are English learners. You cannot pay for that teacher out of English learner funds just because you put the students in there, because that they have to have that teacher all day. They have to have a fourth grade teacher. However, if you provide additional staff to provide English language development or support services, you could pay for that from EL funds. On the last item, I'll mention that for purchasing language appropriate material, including computer assisted technology and basically technology, if your district decides to go one-to-one computing, which is a great thing to do if you can work that out, they cannot do it by saying, we'll use technology funds for regular, non-English speaking students, and we'll use EL funds for those who qualify for that, and SPED funds for those who qualify for that, and migrant funds for that group. You cannot do that. That would be considered supplanting. But you could purchase technology for English learners to use as they need to. Sometimes they want a good tools to use are online dictionaries that might help them, or the ability to have materials read aloud to them by different text readers that are now available, or there are various apps that students may access on the technology devices. So those would be appropriate uses if it's part of your plan. And there are some of the other items. Supplemental instructional services, the difference between that and EL skilled instructional services. Supplemental usually means like before or after school, summer school, supplemental to the regular instructional program for that student. Are there any questions so far?
Yes. So is there a way you could generate a checklist for each of these processes for us? For example, new ESL student checklist, listing all the boxes that need checking and the screens they're on. I feel like our collective data would be much more accurate if we had simple guideline for each type of process instead of having to dig back through PowerPoints and presentations like this.
I will work on creating that to send out with the email. That is a good suggestion.
Okay. The next one is, I think, related to the funding approved expenditures slide. This one and maybe the previous one. Can we pay ESOL teachers out of these funds?
It depends on how you're using your ESOL teachers. If they are, in addition to classroom teachers who are there to teach those students, then yes, you may. Give me an email or a call if you have a specific question about one of those.
Okay, and then the third question, which is the last one for right now, says the form says district and school in IndaStar. Are the forms only filled out on the district IndaStar page, or are there also forms on the school IndaStar pages like last year? Okay,
that's a good question. There is a school page as well. And the school page is filled out similarly. The difference is it does not have the ESOL coordinator information requested. And you only need to fill that out for the buildings who have EL students. Districts are required to review the school level forms. And then once you submit a district form, then I will be reviewing the district forms and providing technical assistance as needed to the district. And the district then provides technical assistance as needed to your schools. Okay. So we will go on. These ELL fund ESOL program assurances. These are what we anticipate them to be. So we have a meeting in a couple of weeks, but these are similar to what was on the home language survey report in the past. It's basically you're saying that you require all students to complete a home language survey, that you screen your students with an approved instrument, that you maintain documentation of each student identified as an English learner, that you maintain accurate student language and EL program data in eSchool, that you're submitting accurate Cycle 2 EL data upon which the calculation of EL funds will be based, that you use a designated source of funds and app scan codes required in all reports requested by ADE, that you use the funds only for the stated purpose of supporting those activities approved in the provision of instructional services, that your district included those improvement activities for English learners in your ACCEPT plan, and that you may use carryover EL funding as allowable from one fiscal year to another, provided you use them for allowable expenses in providing instructional services for English learners, and that you will provide timely, accurate, and complete reports related to those funds as required by ADE. Okay, are there any questions?
We have one. It says, can an ELD teacher be paid for with ESOL funds if this is the base ESOL service?
I would need more context to answer that, so could that person please email me? And then based on the context, I may answer that, include that in the answers I send to everybody. Okay, now about Title III. I'll go through these slides, but Miguel's here to potentially answer some questions. We are down to like the last 8 minutes, but I want to point out that there was a commissioner's memo released like 2 days ago, I believe, with the Title III allotments for this year. And from that memo, it said you had to have 116 English learners reported last year to qualify. How much you are allotted is included in that commissioner's memo. 42 districts qualified. Questions that applied only to Title III districts on the old home language survey report will be asked via Title III application or supplements, including the number of private school students identified and served. At the federal, just a reminder that Miguel is the point of contact for this. And he has shared this information that I'm about to share on the next few screens at the Federal Program Coordinator Conference. So if you're a Title III person, please make sure you're communicating regularly with your Federal Program Coordinator and with Miguel. In the June 24th submission of your plan was a duplicate of your 15-16 application with you just making adjustments as you needed. In the future, the application may be changing. There are required activities if you get Title III funds, and you can, look at these screens to find out what those are that you have to do. And okay, that was 2 screens. In the future, you'll be asked to make sure you indicate what type of program you are providing, how many teachers are working in your Title III program, and the number of additional teachers you'll need, what kind of professional development you have provided as a Title III program, and of the types you provided, you need to indicate whether it was to content classroom teachers, LEP teachers, principals, administrators other than principals, etc. These are items that we're required as a state to report annually to the feds about Title III subgrantees. And so these questions will be sent to you or added to your application in order for us to gather it, instead of how we gathered it in the past on the annual home language survey report. Do you have anything to add to that, Miguel?
Not at this time. I think that's pretty well covered.
Okay. Are there any questions about that?
There is one, and I think this is for Miguel. So it says Title III is for districts serving immigrants, correct?
Title III is for not just immigrants, but if you have over 1/16 of ESL students that are classified ESL, this is some extra money that districts receive to help with those amount of children in your school district.
Miguel, I wonder if the person's also asking about the recent immigrant grant, the portion that is distributed.
That recent immigrant is part of the Title III, and those are determined of the last 2 years and averaged out. And to see if you qualify, I will have that information after this year. It'll be sometime in December. Usually we have 5 or 6 school districts that have a number of increase, and we have a criteria on that increase, and so that'll be sent out in a memo so that you guys, districts, will receive it and know what those districts that qualify for that extra money.
That are based on immigrant counts. But this part of Title III is solely based on your English learner count. And
Absolutely.
It's for those who have 116 or more English learners last year.
That's correct.
But the money is to be used this coming year, and they can refer to the commissioner's memo for all the deadlines and funding guidelines. Okay, so a summary of the changes that we have. The Cycle 2 EL data will be used for the EL fund count. eSchool data will be used throughout the year for assessment data pools. All districts, even those with no English learners, complete the district EL fund general description and ACCEPT. And all districts sign the EL fund program assurances and the ACCEPT assurances. And Title III will have different questions on the application in the near future, so that we can accomplish getting all of the data that we used to request on the home language survey report from the sources listed on this screen. If you need more program information about what has to be provided in an ESOL program, you can consult the ESOL program guide on ADE's English Learners website. You can consult the special needs funding rules, and Section 5 specifically applies to English learners. And the commissioner's memo about all of these changes into how we're determining EL funds is referenced here and linked as well. And as a reminder, your ADE ESOL team is here to serve you. I would be glad to answer any questions you might have about your ESOL program and how you're identifying and providing services to students. Miguel is glad to answer any questions related to Title III, and Alan is glad to answer any items related to assessment in English learners, especially with ELPA 21. So are there any other questions at this time?
We don't have any that have come through.
Okay. I want to thank each of you for taking time out of this very busy time of the year, getting ready for school to start. We will review all the questions that were submitted and compile a frequently asked question type document, as well as a checklist of what you need to do to make sure you're entering everything correctly as suggested by someone here. So thank you for your time. This webinar has been recorded and will be posted as soon as the video is available. And if you have any further questions about this, please don't hesitate to email or call me. If you know of other school districts near you who were not able to participate or did not know about this in time to participate, please encourage them to watch the webinar or to look at the handout to make sure that they are doing what they need to in order to share who their English learners and language minority students are with ADE. Thank you and hope you have a great week. Thanks, Alan and Miguel.
Bye.